An attempt was made to expel my boat. In response, I obstructed their whole marina and its prospects using an HOA letter, a single old sailboat, and a strategy so audacious it almost transformed my serene lakeside residence into a playground for a real estate dynasty. They made a singular error, however. They attempted to obliterate my father's legacy. Consequently, I erected a fence around the sole entry to their treasured marina, an access point they were unaware I lawfully owned. The HOA president's fundraiser imploded, her husband's dubious land acquisition was brought to light, and the entire community was on the verge of discovering the repercussions of provoking the wrong person. The day I found the initial notice from the Homeowners Association was indistinguishable from any other at Lakeside Estates. It was tranquil and still, with the soft rhythm of Green Lake's waters washing against the shore behind my home. The early sun had blanketed the lake in a golden sheen, and I was sipping my coffee on the deck, observing a couple of ospreys gliding over the water in search of their morning meal. In retrospect, I ought to have seen it as the quiet preceding the tempest. It is remarkable how rapidly circumstances can shift when an individual with excessive power determines you do not align with their plans. The tales I have learned of since my own trial indicate that these minor fiefdoms of suburban authority are ubiquitous, discreetly managing the affairs of homeowners who frequently fail to grasp the extent of the power they have ceded until it is too late. 3 years prior, following the conclusion of my divorce, I acquired this lakefront house for a new beginning. The dissolution of my 15-year marriage had left me feeling unmoored, adrift in an existence I no longer recognized. The first time I laid eyes on this property, a humble 2-story craftsman with cedar siding and a veranda that wrapped around it, a sense of calm settled within me. It wasn't merely the house that resonated with me, it was what was situated beyond it. The lot was not the most expansive in the vicinity, but it possessed a unique quality, direct entry to Green Lake and a small, private dock where I could moor the Wanderer, my father's sailboat. Dad had instructed me in sailing on that vessel when I was only 10 years old, his steady hands directing mine on the tiller, his composed voice clarifying how to interpret the wind and the patterns on the water. After his death 5 years ago from an unexpected heart attack, the Wanderer transformed into something more than a boat. It represented a link to him, to irreplaceable memories, and to dialogues we never concluded. The 30-year-old sailboat was not especially noteworthy by contemporary measures, but I maintained it in superb shape, frequently dedicating weekends to preserving its wooden accents and buffing its brass fixtures until they shone in the sunlight. Lakeside Estates embodied everything I desired in a community, a seamless fusion of scenic beauty and neighborliness. This development was established in the late 1980s, comprising 75 residences configured in a horseshoe shape around the charming lake. 25 of these houses, mine included, enjoyed the benefit of direct lake access with their own docks. The majority of my neighbors were amiable, especially Bob Martinez, a retired military veteran residing 2 houses away. Bob was in his mid-60s with salt and pepper hair, consistently cut with military exactitude, yet his disposition was far from inflexible. He possessed a knack for cutting through trivial matters with a good-natured humor that instantly made people comfortable. Then there was Grace Whitmore, a real estate lawyer with the property next to mine. In her late 30s, Grace had a vibrant presence and a keen intellect that made her both a superb neighbor and a redoubtable ally. We would often congregate at the community marina for weekend cookouts or sporadic sailing trips. The marina itself was a source of pride for the residents, a U-shaped dock with slips for 12 boats, an ample deck with integrated benches, and a pavilion for social gatherings throughout the year. It was reached by a slender piece of land that branched off from the main community trail, a seemingly trivial detail that, as I would come to find, held profound significance for my tale. Everything shifted 6 months ago when Anna Sinclair was voted in as the new HOA president. I hadn't devoted much thought to the election. I was employed remotely as a marine engineering consultant and tended to keep to myself. The former president, an older man named Walter, had been sensible and uninvolved. Anna, in contrast, had run on a platform of boosting property values via aesthetic excellence and modernizing community standards. At the time, these phrases sounded innocuous enough. That April morning, I discovered the HOA notice slipped into my mailbox. The letter, printed on heavy, cream-colored paper with the embossed Lakeside Estates logo at the top, declared in direct terms that my boat violated community guidelines concerning aesthetic standards for watercraft. I was instructed to take the Wanderer off my dock within 30 days or incur a daily fine of $100. What bewildered me most was the absence of any prior discussion of aesthetic criteria for boats. The Wanderer was meticulously cared for, structurally solid, and, while not new, was far from being a blight. I strolled down the stone walkway that meandered from my back porch to the dock, the crunch of pine needles soft under my shoes. Positioned at the end of the weathered wooden planks, I regarded my father's boat with a new perspective, attempting to discern what could have prompted the notice. The Wanderer was a 26-foot Pearson sloop, characterized by its classic design and a deep blue hull that provided a striking contrast to the honey-colored teak of its trim. Dad had acquired it pre-owned in 1992 and had painstakingly restored it over a number of years. I had upheld his custom of maintenance, and despite its age, it was in pristine condition. Nothing appeared amiss that could conceivably breach even the most rigid interpretation of aesthetic standards. Then, I cast my gaze toward the adjacent docks, observing the various boats moored along our part of the shore. 3 houses away, a speedboat with chipping paint and a blue tarp haphazardly draped over a damaged area remained untouched. 5 houses in the opposite direction, a pontoon boat that had been stationary for at least a year sat at its moorings, its discolored aluminum betraying neglect. Neither of those boats had been sighted. As I would later verify with their respective owners, the double standard was blatant. It was evident that the Wanderer had been specifically targeted, and I was resolved to discover the reason. After making several inquiries to neighbors, a distinct pattern took shape. Anna Sinclair appeared to be aiming at particular residents with selective application of rules, some of which were not even present in our community's official bylaws. What I failed to grasp was why she had focused on me. I had never engaged with Anna beyond a polite hello at neighborhood functions. As I readied myself to go to the monthly HOA meeting set for that evening, I could not have foreseen that my father's vintage sailboat would become the spark for a community power clash unlike any lakeside estates had ever witnessed. I was then unaware that the classic boat would be the first move in a conflict none of us could have foreseen. Yet, by the time it concluded, everyone in lakeside estates would grasp the consequences of menacing what I held most dear. The community center was atypically crowded for a standard HOA meeting. News had circulated about several controversial items on the docket, such as a proposed 20% hike in monthly fees and new landscaping mandates. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. I chose a seat in the last row, giving a nod to Bob, who was seated across the aisle. Grace showed up a few minutes afterward and took the seat next to me, her leather portfolio in her possession. She was perpetually prepared, a trait from her tenure as an attorney. I had informed her about the notice, and she had volunteered to examine its legality following the meeting. At the head of the room, Anna Sinclair was positioned at the center of the board's table, her posture immaculate and her silver blonde hair drawn back into a severe bun. She was dressed in a starched white blouse and a pricey-looking blue blazer, a large diamond tennis bracelet glinting in the light with every movement of her hand. To her right sat Douglas Hayes, the vice president, a man whose real estate dealings reportedly profited immensely from his ties to Anna and her husband, Thomas, a notable figure. "Let's bring this meeting to order," Anna declared, her voice resonating through the room with rehearsed authority. She struck her gavel, although the room was already silent. I observed as she systematically progressed through the agenda, noticing how she adeptly guided the dialogue to favor her viewpoints. When a member voiced an objection to the fee increase, she promptly pointed to property values and community prestige as reasons, hardly permitting a moment for debate before calling for a vote. The board members, aside from Linda Harrison, the scrupulous secretary who sometimes frowned at procedural missteps, seemed to defer to Anna's judgment without challenge. Finally, after almost 2 hours of conversation about landscaping rules and a fiery discussion on approved exterior paint hues, Anna declared the floor open for other business. I raised my hand without hesitation. Anna's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing me, but she acknowledged me with a nod. I rose, feeling the gaze of my neighbors on me as I spoke. "I received a notice concerning my boat being in breach of aesthetic standards," I started, maintaining a level tone. "I've gone over our community guidelines and cannot locate any precise standards pertaining to boats. Could you please explain which rules my vessel is contravening?" The room became silent. Several of my neighbors shifted their attention to Anna, perhaps curious if they too might be breaking rules they were unaware of. Anna's smile did not reach her eyes as she answered, "Mr. Anderson, thank you for raising this. The board recently assessed watercraft standards and determined that a number of vessels, yours among them, do not align with our community's aesthetic criteria. Your boat, specifically, is quite old-fashioned. The board believes it diminishes the high-end image we are striving to preserve for our lakefront properties. I remained on my feet, conscious that my face was becoming flushed, yet resolved to maintain my composure. Can you indicate the exact guideline that defines dated as a violation? My boat is well cared for and structurally sound. There are other boats in far poorer condition that have not been served notices. It was at that moment Douglas Hayes interjected, his voice tinged with condescension. The HOA possesses the discretion to decide what constitutes an aesthetic breach. Your boat, to be blunt, appears to be a relic from a different time. We are aiming to portray Lakeside Estates as a modern, upscale community. I took out my phone and displayed several pictures I had captured earlier in the day. I would like to present the board with these images of other boats in the community that are in objectively worse shape than mine. If you are enforcing aesthetic standards, shouldn't they be applied to all members equally? Anna's jaw clenched perceptibly. Mr. Anderson, we are handling violations on an individual basis. Your case is what is currently before us. Bob Martinez rose from his seat, his military posture apparent even in street clothes. I've resided here since this community was established, and I've never heard of aesthetic rules for boats. Linda, is there any record of this regulation? Linda Harrison rustled through her documents, appearing ill at ease. I don't find anything specific about boat aesthetics in our existing bylaws or in the minutes from past meetings where this was officially ratified. Anna cut in smoothly, the board has the inherent power to deal with matters impacting property values. We do not require specific documentation for every single decision. The meeting was rapidly descending into chaos. Other residents started to whisper among themselves, some appearing perplexed, others worried. As the debate intensified, Grace leaned toward me and murmured something that sent a chill down my spine. Jim and his husband, Thomas, came to me last week to ask if I thought you might consider selling your property. He alluded to developing waterfront lots for a more affluent clientele. Abruptly, the targeting of my boat became clear. It was never about the Wanderer. It was a maneuver to push me out so Thomas Sinclair could acquire my property. Anna's voice sliced through my reflections. The board's ruling is final. You have 30 days to move the boat from your property, or you will incur a fine of $100 per day. This issue is resolved. She rapped her gavel decisively and proceeded to the next agenda item. I departed from that meeting with my thoughts racing and a slow-burning anger rising within me. This was no longer just about capricious rules. This was a deliberate scheme to oust me from my home. As I turned into my driveway that night, the lights from my house cast reflections on the lake's surface, forming a trail of golden ripples that led to the silhouette of the Wanderer gently bobbing at my dock. I went inside and poured a drink, attempting to weigh my options. That's when I recalled the property surveys and paperwork from when I bought the house. I rummaged through my home office until I located the drawer holding all my property records. As I laid the documents out on my desk, a detail on one of the older property maps drew my attention, something I hadn't noticed before. A minor inconsistency in the property lines that Anna Sinclair had likely never taken into account. The morning sun, pouring through my office window, lit up the property documents arrayed on my desk. I had stayed up for much of the night examining the surveys, deed records, and original development blueprints for Lakeside Estates. My discovery was astonishing. According to the initial survey and property description, my parcel of land stretched further along the lakefront than I had previously understood. The narrow isthmus of land that linked the neighborhood's main footpath to the community Marina was, in fact, situated within my property lines. I rechecked the measurements and cross-referenced them with the latest county records. It was there, clear as day. A surveying mistake made many years ago had gone uncorrected. By law, I was the owner not only of my house and dock, but also of the sole access route to the marina that the HOA valued so highly. I phoned Grace at once, hoping her knowledge of real estate law could either validate my findings or inform me if I was overlooking something. She came over an hour later, her expression transforming from doubt to amazement as she examined the documents. "This is quite something, Jim," she remarked at last, adjusting her glasses on her nose. "Based on these surveys and the legal description in your deed, you do indeed own this parcel of land. The HOA has been utilizing it all this time without a proper easement agreement." She sifted through more papers, her brow creased in thought. "There's no documentation that the former owner ever gave consent for this use, at least not in any written form. Legally, the HOA has been trespassing on your land." I leaned back in my seat, absorbing this new information. So, I could actually block access to the marina if I chose to? Grace gave a slow nod. From a technical standpoint, yes, but that would be a drastic measure, Jim. It would impact everyone in the community, not just Anna. I grasped her point, but a part of me couldn't help but recognize this as the ideal form of leverage. What if I pursued this through legal channels, not to permanently block access, but to affirm my rights? Grace contemplated this for a moment. We could file for a declaratory judgment to officially confirm your ownership. Once that's established, you could broker an easement agreement with the HO based on your own terms. As we explored the potential avenues, my phone vibrated with a text message. It was a picture from Bob showing a second notice that had been posted on my door. This one contained more menacing language about enforcement measures if I failed to comply with the boat removal directive. The notice brought up potential liens on my property, daily accumulating fines, and even the prospect of the HOA engaging contractors to remedy the violation at my own cost. This is plain and simple harassment, Grace stated, her professional composure momentarily breaking to show genuine outrage. They are banking on you being unaware of your rights or too afraid to resist. That afternoon, I had an unforeseen guest. Bob Martinez appeared at my door, his weathered features etched with concern. "Have a moment, Jim?" he inquired. We took a seat on my rear deck overlooking the lake, with the Wanderer in view at the dock below. Bob got straight to the point. "I served on the board for 15 years before stepping down last year. What Anna is doing isn't new. She and her husband have been methodically targeting homeowners they want to push out." Bob revealed that over the last few years, a number of residents had sold their homes after experiencing similar harassment from the HOA. In every instance, the purchasers were either acquaintances of the Sinclairs or business partners of Thomas. They are trying to seize control of as many lakefront properties as they can. I've kept quiet because I lacked evidence, but what they're doing to you is the same strategy. I told Bob about my finding regarding the property line, and his eyes grew wide with surprise. That clarifies why they've been so focused on controlling that piece of land. They've used HOA money to maintain it specifically, even while other common areas are ignored. Before departing, Bob mentioned that Anna was organizing a major marina event in 2 weeks, a fundraiser with local business figures and politicians that she hoped would enhance her husband's network for a forthcoming judicial appointment. "It's her major opportunity to impress," Bob remarked with a knowing glance. It would be a pity if something disrupted those plans. After Bob departed, I came to a decision. I contacted a surveying firm to obtain an official verification of my property lines. If Anna was determined to play hardball, she was about to find out she had picked the wrong adversary. 3 days later, I received official confirmation. The surveyor, a detail-oriented woman named Eleanor who had been measuring property lines in the county for over 2 decades, verified precisely what I had suspected. I was the owner of 0.7 acres of lakefront land, which included the slender access path to the marina. The inconsistency had started in 1997 when a surveying mistake during the development's second phase had mistakenly designated that strip of land as a common area instead of part of my lot. With this information in hand, I consulted with Grace's associate, a property rights lawyer named Michael Fitzgerald, who specialized in these exact types of conflicts. "This is fairly direct from a legal standpoint, Mr. Anderson. You have a few choices," he clarified. "You could file for an injunction against the HOA for trespassing. You could work out a formal easement agreement. Or you could simply assert your property rights by marking and limiting access to your land, which would compel them to come to you for a resolution." Michael warned that legal battles could be protracted and costly, but merely asserting my rights by marking my property would be entirely lawful. "Just ensure you document everything and formally inform the HOA of your plans," he recommended. With that advice, I formulated my strategy. I would mark my property lines and erect a fence, not to immediately block access, but to assert my legal ownership in a manner that could not be overlooked. I got in touch with a fencing company and arranged for the installation to occur the day before Anna's major marina event. The timing was deliberate. If Anna intended to use threats and intimidation to drive me from my home, she was on the verge of discovering that I possessed resources of my own. Over the following week, I made my preparations quietly. I purchased private property and no trespassing signs, arranged for the fencing materials to be delivered covertly to my garage, and set up security cameras at key locations around my property. I also composed a formal letter to the HOA, notifying them of my property rights and my plan to secure my land. I delayed sending it, intending to hand-deliver it when the moment was opportune. In the meantime, Anna dispatched a third notice concerning my boat, this one threatening legal proceedings if I did not comply at once. I filed it with the others as evidence of harassment that could be valuable later. As the day of the plan drew near, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was not about retaliation. It was about confronting a bully who had preyed on me and others before me. It was about safeguarding what was rightfully mine, my home, my father's boat, and now, as I had learned, a parcel of land that provided me with unforeseen leverage. The night before the fence was to be installed, I could barely rest, not from unease, but from sheer anticipation. In a matter of hours, Anna Sinclair would find out that her actions had repercussions. The day of the fence installation began clear and sunny, a quintessential Oregon summer morning. At exactly 5 a.m., a crew from Cascade Fencing showed up at my property. I had intentionally chosen a company from the adjacent county to prevent any potential conflicts of interest with local contractors who might have ties to the HOA board. Following introductions and a brief overview, I reviewed the property line one final time with Rick, the foreman, verifying the markers the surveyor had placed. The crew started to drive cedar posts into the earth at 6-foot intervals, tracing the boundary with precision, which included the vital section that ran directly over the well-traveled path to the marina, the only feasible land route to the community's cherished facility. By 7:30, as the morning sun fully lit up the lake and the fence began to take a distinct form, neighbors started to take note of the commotion. Some paused during their morning strolls, their faces showing curiosity as they observed the workers skillfully putting up the appealing cedar fencing. I gave courteous explanations to those who inquired, presenting them with the survey documents when it was needed. At 8:15, Anna Sinclair's silver Mercedes came to a screeching stop in front of my house. She marched up my driveway, her face red with rage. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she snapped, gesturing wildly at the workers setting up fence posts. I kept a calm expression as I answered, "Good morning, Anna. I'm securing my property lines in accordance with the official survey. Would you care to see the paperwork?" I extended the surveyor's report, which she dismissed. "You are not permitted to build a fence here. This is a community access route to the marina," she declared, her voice escalating. "Actually," I countered, "this is my private land, as verified by county records in this new survey. The HOA has been using it without consent or a legal easement." Anna's face lost some of its color as the reality of the situation began to dawn on her. "This is preposterous. You're only doing this because of the boat citation." I shook my head. "This has nothing to do with the boat, Anna. This is about property rights." Upon discovering that I owned this land, I decided it was time to mark and secure it properly. As a homeowner, that is my prerogative. Anna took out her phone. "I am calling the police. This is destruction of community property." I offered a slight smile. "Please, go ahead. I've already talked to them about my intentions to secure my private land. They're informed of the situation." Indeed, when a police car arrived 30 minutes later in response to Anna's call, the officer examined my documents and verified that I was fully within my rights to fence my property. "This seems to be a civil issue between homeowners and the HOA," the officer explained to a seething Anna. "Mr. Anderson has the right to secure his property lines." By midday, the news had circulated throughout the neighborhood. Residents congregated at a safe distance, observing the spectacle as it happened. Bob showed up with 2 cups of coffee, passing one to me as he got comfortable in a lawn chair he had brought. "You're putting on quite a performance," he remarked with a wink. Anna was on her phone for most of the morning, likely contacting board members and attempting to find a legal loophole. Douglas Hayes appeared around 1 o'clock, his face pale, when he saw the progress of the fence installation. He conferred with Anna on the sidewalk, their hurried whispers occasionally becoming audible as they debated their next move. I caught phrases like the fundraiser, career ending, and find another way in. As the afternoon progressed, the truth of the matter became evident to all. The fence would completely obstruct the only viable access to the marina. Although residents with lakefront properties could still get there by water, the great majority of community members, and crucially, all of Anna's VIP guests for the following day's event, would have no means of reaching it. Around 3 o'clock, Anna came to me again, her earlier rage replaced by a tense effort at diplomacy. "Jim, let's talk about this rationally. Whatever problems you have with the HOA notices, we can resolve them, but this fence cannot be finished today. We have a significant community event tomorrow night." I feigned astonishment. An event? I had no idea. I don't recall receiving an invitation. Anna's forced smile grew strained. "It's a fundraiser for the community. Very prominent people will be there. Surely you wouldn't want to be the one to spoil a charitable function." I mulled over her words for a second. That does sound important. Maybe we should talk about the conditions under which I might think about giving the HOA an easement to cross my land. Anna's relief was obvious but fleeting as I went on. Naturally, any such arrangement would have to recognize my property rights and deal with certain issues I have about the HOA's recent operations. By 5 o'clock, the fence was finished, standing 6 feet high with a locked gate directly across the path to the marina. I held the only key. As the workers gathered their tools, I could see Anna in her car, on her phone, gesturing frantically as she talked. The first attendees for her event were due in less than 24 hours, and as things stood, they had no way to get there. That evening, a group showed up at my door. Anna was at the head, accompanied by Douglas, Linda, and several other HOA board members. Behind them, I spotted State Representative William Parker and his wife, as well as a few well-known business owners from the vicinity. Anna's meticulously applied makeup couldn't conceal her agitation as she inquired if we could talk about the matter privately. I welcomed everyone into my living room, which soon filled with uneasy HOA board members and bewildered VIP guests. "Jim has recently found a discrepancy in the property line," Anna started, trying to cast the situation in a light favorable to her. "We are hoping to find a temporary solution for tomorrow's fundraiser while we address the specifics." I decided it was the right moment to reveal all my cards. "Let me clear up the situation for everyone," I stated, distributing copies of the property survey and the 3 menacing notices I had been sent about my boat. 3 weeks ago, I was served a notice instructing me to remove my late father's sailboat from my dock, claiming aesthetic violations. When I brought this up at the HOA meeting, I found out that no such rule exists in our bylaws. After getting 2 more progressively threatening notices, I looked over my property papers and made a startling discovery. I detailed how the land that provided access to the marina was legally mine and had been for years, without any formal easement agreement with the HOA. What is especially noteworthy, I added, is that soon after getting these notices, I found out that Anna's husband, Thomas, had been asking around to see if I might be willing to sell my property. The room fell into an awkward silence. Representative Parker glanced at Anna with an arched eyebrow. Linda, the HOA secretary, cleared her throat with nervousness. I should add that I have never located any records of aesthetic standards for boats in our files. It is not in our bylaws or any ratified amendments. Douglas fidgeted in his seat, his uneasiness clear. Anna tried to seize back control of the conversation. "This is all a big misunderstanding. The board has the authority to uphold community standards. And we've gotten complaints about Jim's boat." I raised an eyebrow. "Complaints from who, exactly?" "I talked to my immediate neighbors, and none of them had a problem with my well-kept sailboat. In fact, they pointed out several other boats in worse shape that hadn't been cited." Douglas, likely sensing the changing tide, made an unexpected confession. "The boat rule was informal. We were just trying to refresh the community's image." Representative Parker, who had been listening with great attention, finally intervened. "It appears to me that there are 2 distinct matters at hand. A property boundary issue that requires a legal solution, and questions about all homeowners that should be a concern for everyone." He faced me. "Mr. Anderson, irrespective of how this situation came about, would you contemplate allowing access for tomorrow's charity function? It is for the Children's Hospital, after all." I had no wish to penalize a deserving charity for Anna's conduct. I would be prepared to open the gate for a short time, but I would require certain guarantees in writing from the HOA board first. Over the subsequent hour, with Representative Parker acting as a mediator, we forged an agreement. The HOA would officially recognize my property rights and commit to negotiating a proper easement agreement within 30 days. All citations regarding my boat would be withdrawn, and a special board meeting would be convened to reassess HOA governance protocols. Anna remained silent through most of the discussion, her previous assertiveness replaced by a barely suppressed rage. By the time everyone had gone, I held a signed document from the HOA board and had a key ceremony scheduled for the next afternoon, where I would ceremoniously unlock the gate for the charity event. As I shut the door after the final guest, my phone vibrated with a text from an unfamiliar number. "We need to talk. I have information about the Sinclairs you should hear. Martin Sinclair and his ex-husband." The following morning, I met Martin Sinclair at a coffee shop in town, away from prying neighbors. He was a surprisingly plain-looking man in his mid-50s, with receding hair and weary eyes that hinted at the toll years of dealing with Anna had taken. "I've been observing what's going on in Lakeside Estates," he started once we were seated with our coffees. "When I learned about the Finns situation, I knew I had to share what I know." Martin disclosed that before their divorce 5 years ago, Anna and Thomas had laid out plans to systematically acquire control of the lakefront properties in Lakeside Estates. They intend to transform the community from single-family residences into a high-end resort development. Thomas has investors ready through his law firm's network. According to Martin, the strategy was to employ the HOA as a lever to compel certain homeowners to sell, especially those with premium waterfront lots. They go after individuals they believe won't resist: retirees, recent divorcees, people experiencing financial hardship. They use selective rule enforcement, invent new regulations, and generally make life miserable until selling appears to be the most straightforward choice. Martin produced his tablet and displayed records he had retained from his time with Anna, notes on which properties they aimed to purchase, methods to employ, and even a preliminary timeline for the development project. "After you erected that fence, Thomas called me in a state of panic, trying to determine if I still had any legal claim to Anna's house that might hinder their plans. That's when I resolved to get in touch with you." I dedicated the remainder of the morning to confirming Martin's assertions. A review of county property records showed that a company named Sinclair Lakefront Holdings LLC, registered to Thomas's law office address, had in fact acquired 6 lakefront properties over the last 3 years. Grace assisted me in tracing the ownership hierarchy, which uncovered links to a development firm that specialized in luxury vacation rentals. When I presented her with Martin's information, she let out a soft whistle. "This clarifies a great deal. They're not just acting as petty HOA despots. They're carrying out a business strategy at the detriment of their neighbors." By early afternoon, I had gathered sufficient proof to build a strong case. I called Bob and requested his help in spreading the news about an urgent community meeting at my home, to be held right after Anna's charity event. "Tell everyone it concerns the future of Lakeside Estates. They will want to hear this." At 4 o'clock, as I had promised, I unlocked the gate to grant access to the Marina for the charity fundraiser. Anna averted her gaze from me during the brief ceremony, where Representative Parker delivered a polite speech on community cooperation and resolving disagreements. The event unfolded as scheduled, with caterers, musicians, and formally dressed guests streaming past my new fence toward the marina. I made a brief appearance, engaging in polite small talk while watching Anna and Thomas mingle with the crowd, seemingly oblivious that their meticulously laid plans were on the verge of collapsing. As the charity function concluded, residents started to head over to my house for the community meeting I had called. I had arranged chairs in my backyard with a view of the lake, and by 7:30, close to 50 homeowners had assembled, intrigued by what I was about to reveal. Bob had assisted me in creating a straightforward presentation with the evidence we had collected. Once everyone was settled, I started by detailing how my inquiry into the boat notice had uncovered a much larger issue. "This isn't merely about my property rights or a capricious rule concerning boats," I explained to my neighbors. "This is about a methodical scheme to alter the very fabric of our community without our awareness or permission." I laid out the evidence piece by piece: the history of targeted harassment, the properties already bought by the Sinclair's company, the development schemes Martin had exposed, and the financial records that showed HOA funds being redirected for marina upgrades that matched the resort development idea. The projection screen behind me showed documents, property sales, and a timeline that made the plot undeniable. With every new piece of information, gasps and whispers spread through the group. As I continued, I could see the shock and rage spreading through the crowd like a tidal wave. Long-standing residents looked especially betrayed as they grasped the extent of their manipulation. Towards the rear of the assembly, I saw Anna and Thomas show up, their expressions growing grim as they understood what was unfolding. Thomas tried to cut in, shouting that this was defamation and fabrication, but several residents silenced him with unexpected firmness. "Let him speak," called out Eleanor Jenkins, a 70-year-old retired schoolteacher who had been a resident of Lakeside Estates since its inception. "I've been wondering why I suddenly received a citation for my bird feeders after 15 years without any issues." Her usually mild voice had a sharp edge I had never heard before. When I concluded my presentation of the evidence, a stunned silence filled the room. It was broken when Linda, the HOA secretary, rose with her ubiquitous notebook. "I can verify that funds were reallocated without proper board consent," she stated, her voice trembling slightly but gaining confidence as she proceeded. "I have recorded several occasions where Anna made unilateral decisions. Just last month, $22,000 was moved from our reserve fund for what was termed Marina enhancement planning. But I was never presented with any formal proposals or bids for such a project." She adjusted her glasses and skimmed through her detailed notes. "When I inquired about it, I was informed it was a routine maintenance expense and I shouldn't concern myself with the particulars." Douglas Hayes, likely sensing the shift in sentiment, stood up next. His typical self-assurance had vanished, replaced by a jittery energy as he made a startling admission. "Thomas approached me last year about helping them acquire certain properties," he confessed, looking away from the Sinclairs. "He guaranteed me exclusive listings on the resort units once they were built. I didn't realize it would impact so many people. He claimed it would only be a few properties, that it would raise values for everyone." His voice faded as several neighbors shot him angry looks. The floodgates had opened. One after another, neighbors stood up to recount their own stories. Frank and Maria Gonzalez described how they were persistently troubled about their vegetable garden until they were on the verge of selling their retirement home. Widower Henry Thompson talked about getting weekly citations for his classic truck, which had never been a problem in the previous decade. Rebecca Wilson, a single mother working night shifts as a nurse, tearfully recounted how she had been fined for leaving her garbage bins out too long when her work schedule was altered. "I've paid over $3,000 in fines this past year for violations that were never a problem before," stated George Fleming, a retired accountant who had meticulously recorded every single interaction. "And consider this." He displayed a printout of property records. "My next-door neighbor sold to Sinclair Holdings 4 months after they moved out, and they received 15% less than the market value." These individuals were buckling under the strain of relentless harassment. The picture that unfolded was damning and far more widespread than even I had imagined. The Sinclairs had been systematically exploiting the HOA as a personal instrument to further their business ambitions at the community's expense, fostering a climate of anxiety and fear that had impacted dozens of families. As more accounts were shared, I saw several residents comforting one another, many realizing for the first time that their experiences were not isolated incidents. When all the proof had been laid out, Bob rose and spoke to the assembly. "I propose that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in the current HOA leadership and select an interim board until proper elections can be organized." The motion was seconded at once, and a vote was conducted on the spot. The outcome was decisive, 52 for, 3 against. Anna, her face a rigid mask of anger and shame, made one final attempt at a defense. "You are not allowed to do this. This meeting is not officially sanctioned. There are rules to follow." Bob interrupted her decisively. "The bylaws permit emergency measures in situations of gross misconduct. I believe we have met that criterion today." The community promptly chose an interim board, with Bob as the temporary president, Grace as the vice president, and 3 other well-regarded residents taking the other roles. Their first official action was to cancel all outstanding violation notices issued during Anna's tenure and to commission an audit of the HOA's finances. Their second was to start talks with me for a formal easement agreement for Marina access, one that would safeguard both my property rights and the community's collective interests. As the meeting broke up, neighbors came over to express their gratitude for my having brought the truth into the open. Anna and Thomas departed without a word to anyone, their ambitious dreams of a lakefront resort empire collapsing around them. In the ensuing weeks, our community experienced a profound change. The interim board, guided by Bob, overhauled the HOA bylaws to thwart future power abuses, mandating transparent decision-making and homeowner consent for significant alterations. My property line was officially recognized, and I issued an easement to the HOA for Marina access in return for a small yearly fee and lasting protection for the wanderer's spot at my dock. An independent audit uncovered that Anna had misappropriated nearly $50,000 of HOA funds for activities linked to the development scheme. Legal proceedings were started to reclaim those funds, and both Anna and Thomas were subject to professional ethics inquiries, his from the State Bar Association and hers from the Real Estate Licensing Board. The Sinclairs listed their house for sale less than a month after the community meeting and departed soon after. Their development firm was dissolved, and the properties they had purchased were sold to families eager to join our revitalized community. Douglas stepped down from the board, and his real estate practice took a hit as neighbors opted for other agents. In a turn of events that felt like poetic justice, Martin Sinclair, Anna's ex-husband who had supplied the vital evidence, bought Anna's old house at a steep discount and became a dynamic, valued member of the neighborhood. As for myself, I dedicated that summer to restoring the Wanderer to a condition better than new. I replaced the frayed upholstery, reconditioned the woodwork, and fitted new sails. On pleasant weekends, I started giving neighborhood children sailing lessons, imparting the same skills my father had taught me many years ago. The fence along my property line stood as a testament, but I put in a handsome wooden gate that remained open, fastened with a decorative anchor instead of a lock. The marina evolved into the genuine community hub it was always intended to be, featuring cookouts, sailing regattas, and even small concerts on the dock. A year following the fence incident, as it became known in local legend, Lakeside Estates had evolved into the type of community I had always envisioned when I bought my home. The new HOA board, chosen in a vote with unprecedented participation, concentrated on improving our common areas rather than micromanaging residents' lives. Property values rose organically as news of our lakeside community's positive environment and sensible governance got out. Bob frequently jested that I ought to run for HOA president, considering my demonstrated leadership abilities, but I was happy with my position as the community's sailing mentor and occasional organizer of sunset gatherings on my dock. At times, as I sit on the Wanderer, observing the sun dip below the horizon and paint Green Lake's surface with golden light, I contemplate how things could have unfolded differently. If I had yielded to Anna's demands and moved my father's boat, the Sinclairs might have ultimately realized their ambition of turning our neighborhood into a commercial resort. Instead, my obstinate refusal to give up a family legacy resulted in the safeguarding of an entire community. Occasionally, an old boat is not merely a means of traversing water. Sometimes, as in my situation, it becomes the instrument for achieving justice and imparting a lesson to arrogant individuals that they will not soon forget. The Wanderer stays where it should be, at my dock, prepared for its next journey, a testament to standing up for what is right, even when the chances appear to be against you. If there is a single lesson I have drawn from this ordeal, it is that understanding your rights and being prepared to defend them with calm but resolute action can be pivotal. Bullies like Anna Sinclair depend on people to surrender rather than to challenge them. They employ intimidation, selective application of rules, and the facade of authority to achieve their objectives. Yet, when someone confronts them, equipped with facts, evidence, and resolve, their influence rapidly dissolves. My father taught me that on the water, as in life, the size of the boat is not what counts, but rather the skill and bravery of the individual at the helm. I like to believe he would be proud of how I navigated these turbulent waters, not only safeguarding his cherished Wanderer, but also setting in motion a wave of positive transformation that extended throughout our entire community.